I can now announce the arrangements for the elections of the chairs of the Education and Transport Committees. I think it's already started. Nominations for both elections will close at noon on Tuesday the 15th of November. Nomination forms will be available from the Vote Office, Table Office and Public Bill Office. Following the House's decision of 16th of January 2020, only members of the Conservative Party may be candidates in either election. If there is more than one candidate for either election, the ballot will take place on Wednesday, the 16th of November, between 11 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. in the I Division lobby. Right, let us come to questions to Secretary of State for Works and Pensions, Nick Smith.
Number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Welcome, Secretary of State.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I also associate myself with your remarks regarding Paul Pelosi and the Speaker in the United States. Our thoughts are with them both. Mr. Speaker, it is a huge honour to stand here as the new Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. And could I just, in so doing, pay tribute to all those who preceded me, in particular the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Norwich North, who was an outstanding Secretary of State and, of course, also an outstanding Minister of State for disabled people. Mr. Speaker, the cold weather payments design ensures that support reaches those most vulnerable. The energy price guarantee is supporting millions of households with energy costs from now until April 2023, and this is on top of the cost of living support worth over $37 billion for around 8 million households on means-tested benefits.
Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I associate myself with your remarks about the Pelosi family? Can I congratulate the Right Honourable Member on his appointment? Yeah. Now, the £25 cold weather payment rate hasn't been updated since 2008. In today's money, it should be worth £37. Yeah. Now, parts of Blaenau Gwent are over 1,000 foot above sea level, but also one of the most deprived constituencies in the UK. So will the Secretary of State look again at the criteria for this scheme? Surely areas with bad weather and higher energy costs with lower incomes should get a fairer deal.
Yeah. Well, can I welcome the honourable gentleman's question, because these are very important payments. They are automatic, as he will know. They're received within 14 days typically, and they are targeted on those who are most vulnerable. His point about the particular local conditions and the elevation of parts of his own constituency are well made, and I would be very happy to have further discussions with him about that, though I should point out that I believe there are 77 different weather stations to serve as reference points for different temperatures, so it may be that there's one very close to the area that he describes.
Andrew Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend to his position. Could he tell the House what progress his department's making in increasing the uptake of pension credit, which means that more vulnerable elderly will be able to obtain or eligible for cold weather payments?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to raise this very important benefit pension credit. He will be aware that the department has been fully engaged on encouraging pensioners who will qualify to take up this benefit, and it's important that they do because it's worth over £3,000 per year and is a gateway benefit for other benefits in turn. I would like to just pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Hexham, who as a minister has done a great deal to push greater uptake, including a week of effort back in, I think, June, where the uptake increased by 275% in that week.
Leanne Hart.
Number 2, please, Mr. Speaker.
State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer question 2 and question 3 and question 19 together. Mr. Speaker, the labour market has recovered strongly since 2020, with payroll employment up on the pre-pandemic level in all 12 regions of the United Kingdom. We have comprehensive support in place to help people to find, progress and stay in work, with additional support for groups we know are more likely to be inactive, such as those aged 50 plus and people with a disability.
Sally Ann Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Work is the best route out of poverty, and it's concerning that claimants for and public spending on working age benefits have increased significantly since 2019. There is more the government can do beyond the conditionality regime, so can the Secretary of State confirm that implementing universal support will be considered, which is designed to help those facing barriers to work and overcome the complex challenges holding them back?
Well, can I agree entirely with my honourable friend that work is the best route out of poverty, and can I also commend her in that regard for her private members' bill, which the department is very pleased to be supporting. Our low unemployment rate, Mr. Speaker, demonstrates our extensive support for those moving into work, and universal support has been replaced, as you may know, by Help to Claim, which provides tailored support to individuals making a universal credit claim across England, Scotland and Wales.
Dale Zachner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The economy is plagued by labour shortages from care to hospitality. And on Saturday in Cambridge, 200 bus services cancelled because of lack of drivers, leaving health workers unable to get to and from their places of work. But after a decade of zero-hours contracts, short-term contracts, it's no surprise that people want out. They don't want to be at work. It's too tough. So isn't it time for the government to recognise that good workplace rights are not just good for workers, they're good for employers and they're good for all of us?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the honourable gentleman. He is right to raise the issue of economic inactivity. For example, this will be a major focus that I will have as a Secretary of State. We have 9 million people who are economically inactive at the moment, and we desperately need to get as many as we can into the workforce, not least because under this government we have very low unemployment, very high levels of employment, and 1.25 million vacancies in the economy.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend and send him my very best wishes for his time doing this very important job. And can I suggest to him that he has a look at some research that was published earlier this year by the Prince's Trust, which found that there are hundreds of thousands of young people not in education, employment and training, many of whom are economically active, who want to work. Many of them are living with physical or mental disabilities, but they want to work. And does he agree with me that with the right support, that they would enable them to stay in touch with the labour market and prevent patterns of worklessness setting in at a very young age?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for his question and recognise the great work that he did as a former Secretary of State. There are, Mr. Speaker, 820,000 young people out of work and not in full-time education. And my right honourable friend is absolutely right. There are many things that this government can do, and indeed is. With our youth offer, which includes our youth employment programme, youth employability coaches, and of course 150 youth hubs across Great Britain.
Sure.
Can I welcome the honourable gentleman as one of my neighbours to his new post and congratulate him on his appointment. What estimate has he made of the number of people who would really like to work but currently can't, because they're among the hundreds of thousands waiting on the record-long NHS waiting lists?
And I thank my right honourable member for his warm words. I think that is an issue that would probably be best answered by the Department for Health, and I will certainly be very happy to look into that for him. But what we do know is that there is a long tail of people that would otherwise like to work who are long-term sick, in fact some 2.5 million in total. And getting back to my earlier answer, Mr. Speaker, they will be a prime focus, working with the Health Department, for our department to see how we can assist and support them back into the workplace.
Lois Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I wish my right honourable friend and all of his team every success in leading this vital mission in government in helping people into work and protecting the most vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, as he says, with more vacancies than people unemployed and a rising 9 million people economically inactive, does he agree with me and with British business that labour shortage is one of their greatest obstacles? And what is his plan to unlock the talents of those who have not recently looked for work?
So I thank my right honourable friend for that question. Her analysis is entirely right. We have an overheated labour market, a high level of vacancies, and the key issue that businesses up and down the country are constantly raising is a lack of staff to be taken on. Broadly speaking, economic inactivity breaks down into several sectors. I won't go through all of them, Mr. Speaker, but long-term sick, we have already touched upon 2.5 million people. We have 900 disability employment advisors within the DWP, but we also have a number who are retired early 1.2 million, for which we do have some schemes, but is an area in which I think we need to provide some further attention to come up with perhaps new ways forward for that group.
Mr. Nossel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. At last week's Work and Pension Committee meeting on the Plan for Jobs and Employment Support, Tony Wilson from the Institute of Employment Studies highlighted Scotland's local employability partnerships in providing tailored support reflective of local circumstances. So in light of recent analysis by the IFS showing that health-related economic inactivity has had the largest increase in the working age population since the end of 2019, would the UK Government consider following Scotland's approach in providing more customised support and helping people into work instead of their punitive sanctions regime?
We do already, Mr. Speaker, have a local skills improvement plan, but I would be delighted to listen to the thoughts of the Honourable Lady. We're always happy to share best practice and to learn from his experience and that of the devolved administration in Scotland.
Shadow Minister Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to welcome the new Secretary of State and all the new ministers to their positions. Mr. Speaker, we've heard Conservative ministers, not least the many Prime Ministers that we've had in recent months, crowing about low unemployment. But as the new Secretary of State will know from his time chairing Treasury Select Committee, as I know, sometimes it's important to look at the figures yourself. And whilst there are 1.2 million people unemployed in our country at the moment, there are 1.8 million inactive people who say they want a job. Taken together, Mr. Speaker, that's a disaster for our country. And I want to know what it is about years and years of Tory misrule that always leaves 3 million people on the scrap heap.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've kind of taken a personal vow in these questions that I'm not to engage in too much punctual-duty politics with the Honourable Lady. So I will not talk about unemployment and what happens when different parties get into power. I'll leave that for another day. But the Honourable Lady is absolutely right about the key challenge around economic inactivity. And that is why, for example, the Department in recent times has doubled the number of new work coaches over the last 2 years, an additional 13,500 people engaged in working to support exactly the people that she has rightly identified who need that assistance to get into work. As I have said, Mr. Speaker, I intend to put considerable more energy into this whole area of economic inactivity and to have further announcements in due course to bring to the House.
We now come to Dan Carden.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No assessment has been made. Emergency measures brought in during COVID meant the sanctions rate was artificially low. We always expected the rate to increase as we reintroduced face-to-face appointments and conditionality to help fill record numbers of job vacancies.
Dan Carden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm disappointed by that answer. I can tell the Minister the current high rate of universal credit sanctions is unprecedented. Right now, twice as many people on universal credit are being sanctioned and having their benefits cut compared to before the pandemic 3 years ago. So at the very moment that families are facing the reality of hunger and freezing homes because of soaring food prices and energy bills and rising rents, rather than making things harder for those struggling and punishing those on the lowest incomes, will the Minister commit to raising social security in line with inflation and end the sanctions regime that only inflicts more hardship and homelessness in areas like mine this winter?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid I don't agree with the honourable gentleman. People are only sanctioned if they fail to attend without good reason and fail to meet the requirements that they have agreed to. Conditionality is an important part of a fair and effective welfare system, and it is right that there is a system in place to encourage claimants to take reasonable steps to prepare for and move into work. But I would reiterate, claimants with severe mental health or wellbeing conditions are not subject to work-related requirements or indeed sanctions.
Shadow Minister Cameron.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Secretary of State has indicated a difference in tone in the conduct of the Department. There is a way in which he can demonstrate that. The Department has conducted its own examination into the effect of sanctions and of conditionality, which his predecessor has refused to publish. He has an opportunity now to ensure an informed discussion of the effectiveness of sanctions and allow us to have that debate in this chamber. Will he now publish that report?
Well, the reality in terms of sanctions is they're incredibly important to support the work coach in doing their job. And I would say that this really matters because engaging with the work coach where there can be issues underlying, if you're a care leaver or something going on at home, it's a really important way to engage with people. And sanctions do not apply to all claimants. As I said earlier, if you had limited capability to work, if there is issues around how you can work, then the work coaches will fully use their discretion to make sure that people are supported, but not engaging is not the right option.
Bob Seeley.
Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. We published an impact analysis on the Social Security Additional Payments Bill, which estimates that in the Isle of Wight constituency, 18,300 families are eligible for the means-tested benefit cost of living payment, and 17,300 individuals are eligible for the disability cost of living payment.
Bob Seeley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I congratulate all the ministers on their new roles and thank him for that information. Regarding the cost of living, what reassurances can the ministerial team give me that pensioners on the Isle of Wight and indeed throughout Britain are going to be looked after this winter, considering that they are on fixed incomes? Well, I think what my honourable friend can be assured of, and it's fair to say that he is always a passionate advocate for people on the Isle of Wight in raising the issues and concerns that are relevant to them. We have a Prime Minister who has consistently demonstrated that he is on the side of vulnerable people and hard-working people across the country. That will continue to be the case. We've seen a £37 billion package of support put in place to help with these cost of living pressures. And of course, we always keep the appropriateness of that under review.
Simon Baines.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question number 6, please.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. You're very kind. With permission, I will answer questions 6 and 15 together. Our dedicated work coaches engage with claimants to determine what additional support they may need to enter or progress in work, and where skills gaps are identified, claimants will be encouraged to access skills-related employment programmes such as sector-based work academies, skills boot camps or appropriate local training provision.
Mr Speaker, my constituent in Clwyd South, Kerry Mackay, recently wrote to me saying there's a lot of talk about getting people back into work and those on low incomes finding a better job, but I think the government is missing a trick by not highlighting how much they will help people, single mothers and mature students like me, to get a decent education and ultimately pull themselves out of poverty for good. Could the Minister advertise as effectively as possible how universal credit can support people like Kerry to study for their degrees?
Well, we do want to support our constituents like Kerry, and I thank my honourable friend for his question. I suggest he writes to me with specific details, but I can assure him and Kerry that recipients of UC can take part in training without compromising their benefit entitlement, and generally there is a great effort being made to ensure that people who want to get into work can get into work.
Mr Speaker, I welcome the new Secretary of State to his place and the whole of his new front team. I'm sure we can expect great things. Does my honourable friend agree that apprenticeships and further education are a key way to upskilling our young people? And would he visit Southend West soon and meet some of our successful apprentices like Holly at Guardian Exhibition and Display in Eastwood and like Apico in Southend that also offer fantastic apprenticeships?
Well, all roads lead to Southend as far as I'm concerned, Mr Speaker, and my old friend is proving to be a fantastic champion and successor of our good friend Sir David Amos. I would be delighted to visit. I welcome the great work of the company she mentioned and absolutely believe very strongly that we need to improve the skills package that we are taking forward.
Mr Speaker, thank you. Can I start by sending my condolences and thoughts to all those who were tragically killed in Seoul, South Korea at the weekend? I'm sure we'll all be thinking of them at this time. Education, formal or informal, is vital to developing a highly skilled workforce. Adults with neurodivergencies like autism or ADHD may require personalised support with their learning. What assessment has the Minister made of the efficacy of support currently in place, and what steps are the Government taking to improve this?
Well, skills and education are a devolved matter, and I echo the very worthwhile words that she just made in respect to South Korea. But obviously there is great work being done in youth hubs in particular, which is what I would particularly recommend to her.
Sir Stephen Timms.
7, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I begin by recognising the important work that the Right Honourable Gentleman carries out as Chair of the Select Committee, thank him for the cooperation he showed me when I was a fellow Chair of a Select Committee, and say that I look forward to appearing before his committee before too long. Mr. Speaker, as the Right Honourable Gentleman will know, universal credit is but one factor in addressing food insecurity, and the Government has provided significant support with the £37 billion cost of living package.
Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate the Secretary of State on his appointment and warmly welcome him. I think we already have a date in the diary for him to come before the committee, and we look forward to that. Current large-scale food bank dependence is shameful. It was up by 46% in August and September on a year previously, according to the Trussell Trust. And it's reported in the press today that hospitals are seeing a big rise in malnutrition cases. The Family Resources Survey says that food insecurity amongst universal credit claimants fell from 43% to 27% after the £20 a week uplift was introduced. Doesn't all that show how crucial it is that the Prime Minister keeps the promise he made as Chancellor to uprate benefits next April by 10.1%?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to preempt my decision on the uprating of benefits, or indeed the triple lock, and we will need to wait until at least the 17th of November, when my right honourable friend the Chancellor will come to the House with his autumn statement, and those details will be known at that point. But he raises the Family Resources Survey. One statistic that caught my eye, Mr. Speaker, was that the percentage of households with UC claimants who are in food security rose from 57% in 2019-20 to 73% in 1920-21. Any element of food insecurity is too much. I recognise that. And that is why this government, and this Prime Minister in particular, are absolutely determined to use whatever we have at our disposal to work on those figures and to improve them, and that includes the various interventions that we've already discussed during these questions.
Martin Docker to use.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'll answer questions 8 and 23 together. We have already taken decisive action in making work pay, cutting the universal credit taper rate to 55%, increasing UC work allowances, meaning on average around an extra £1,000 a year for low-income households. In addition to this, 2 cost of living payments totalling £650 paid to more than 8 million low-income households on UC tax credits, pension credits and legacy benefits, and with extra helpful pensioners and disability benefits totalling over £37 billion this year.
Good to use.
I'm grateful to the Minister's reply, Mr. Speaker, but the Joseph Rowntree Foundation has warned that if social security doesn't get upgraded with inflation, it will be the largest permanent, deliberate real terms cut to the basic rate of social security by a British government in history. And according to the Child Poverty Action Group, this will push 200,000 children into poverty. With even the UN rapporteur on extreme poverty warning, it will mean that lives will be lost. So on that, can the Minister tell the House what are they going to do to stop that?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for that question, and I note he'll be visiting his Dumbarton JCP very shortly, and I'm sure that will help him to see just the range of interventions that we have in job centres, including the benefits calculator on .gov.uk and the cost of living intervention. But I would remind him the Scottish Government does have a range of powers, including the ability to provide their own welfare benefits to people in Scotland using existing existing reserved benefits, and the Scottish Government can see how it would like to use its powers and its budget itself.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Happy Halloween. Many of my constituents have found social security payments inadequate because they've not kept pace with the cost of living. But for William Thompson and Anne McCurley, it's even more frustrating because they narrowly miss out on pension credit and therefore all the passported benefits. In Anne's case, she misses out by only £3 a week. So will the Minister review the cut-off so that as many people as possible can access the support they so badly need this winter?
Yes. Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for the point, and I mentioned two particular websites which I think are incredibly important for people to make sure that they are getting every single bit of help that they need, and there is always a cut-off point which is very challenging. I understand that there's huge amounts of work going on in her own community to support people, including getting people into work and progressing them and working with local employers, but of course the pensions issue is something that the Secretary of State has just answered and will be further updated on the 17th of November.
I thank my honourable friend for the answers she's already given. For those people meeting the cost of living on social security payments, now a big concern many of my constituents have is over the cost of energy over the course of the winter, and the government's got a plan for the next 6 months to support people. Could my honourable friend give my constituents reassurance that that plan, when it comes towards its end, will be under review to see what ongoing support could be offered if required?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising that matter, and I worked with the Prime Minister on the plan for jobs, and he's been very clear that he wants to protect the most vulnerable, which is why we're providing families with direct payments worth at least £1,200 over winter, and we'll all look with interest with what the Chancellor does on the 17th.
In which case we'll go to Shadow Minister Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Too many disabled people have been disproportionately hit by the cost of living crisis, with extra costs of over £600 a year. We have sadly seen too many unable to cope with this. The Information Commissioner ruled that the DWP unlawfully prevented the release of over 20 reports into the deaths of benefit claimants. We must be able to scrutinise whether the actions taken by DWP were sufficient or timely enough to prevent the harms identified from happening again. So will the new Secretary of State agree to publish these and all other secret reports? And a yes or no would actually suffice.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and I understand there's an interest from the opposite bench in regard to reports. But in regard to my role at DWP, it's about people and helping people up and down the land. And that's what we're doing in regard to helping people with disabilities. The extra cost with the disability payment, around 6 million people will be helped by that extra one-off cost of £150, and making sure that we, all across DWP, are focused on the most vulnerable.
We now come to SNP spokesperson Kirsty Black.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I welcome the new ministerial team to their place. I hope to meet the new Secretary of State in early course. It was quite difficult to secure a meeting with some of his predecessors, unfortunately. The new Prime Minister, Mr Speaker, spoke of the difficult decisions that will have to be made. But the real difficult decisions are those being forced upon our constituents. People on low incomes struggling to afford the basics, to pay their bills, to heat their homes, or to feed their children. Let's not forget the reality, the tragic human cost of over a decade of Tory austerity, which urgently needs to end. Does the Minister agree that uprating benefits in line with inflation is not a difficult decision, and instead it's the only moral course of action?
Well, that is not a matter for me, but I would like to reiterate at the box, the government fully, Mr Speaker, the government fully understands the pressures that we're all facing, and we all have constituents facing these matters, and it's absolutely right that we take that decisive action to support people with their bills. And we're talking as if we're not, and this is £37 billion worth of help for the cost of living, including £400 of non-repayable discounts to eligible households, providing an energy bill support scheme. And what I would say again, benefits calculator on .gov.uk, the cost of living website as well, and please make sure people reach out to their councils. The way the Chamber is talking this afternoon is if there is no help there, and it's important our constituents know that is far from the case.
John MacDonald.
No, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A wide range of support is available to those of state pension age and for those on low income who are entitled to pensioner benefits.
John MacDonald.
Members across the House will have appreciated the sense of grievance and injustice from women born in the 1950s who were not given proper notice of the rise in the state pension age. The Ombudsman has found this as recognised this as maladministration. The Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge, when he was the Prime Minister and leading the campaign in 2019 in the general election, said he would address this matter. Since then, more of those women are now living in poverty. 200,000 of them have died. And yet, not a single minister has met them since 2016. Could I ask whether the minister would be willing to meet a delegation from the WASPI campaign to talk about their plight and find a way forward?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I understand where he's coming from, but there is an ongoing investigation, so it would be inappropriate for me to meet people at this stage.
SNP spokesperson Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Minister knows that in July 2021, the PHSO found the DWP guilty of maladministration regarding state pension age increases. Now, it's also a fact that PHSO suggested to the Department that they could consider being proactive in remedies for injustice suffered by 3.8 million women and not waiting their final conclusions. So, given the cost of living crisis that's ongoing at the moment, surely now is the time for this government to step up to the plate and agree fair and swift compensation for the women suffering that injustice.
I'm sorry to disappoint the honourable gentleman, but I must repeat that I cannot comment whether there's an ongoing investigation.
Rob Roberts.
Question 10, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As of February 2022, which was the latest published data, there were 1.38 million pension credit claimants.
Roberts.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the new Minister to her place, and hopefully she can continue the excellent work done by my honourable friend for Hexham in this area. Despite all of that excellent work, however, take-up is still relatively low, and in my constituency we have 20% more over 65s than the UK average. So would the new Minister meet with me to discuss how we might be able to make pension credit, at least in part, an automatic benefit so that struggling pensioners can get the money that they're rightly entitled to?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman makes a very good point, but it's difficult to enrol people automatically in pension credit given the data the government holds. But I'm very keen to see how increased data sharing could be used to produce a larger number of claims.
Gerald Jones.
Question 12, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, I'd like to answer questions 12 and 14 together. This winter, over 8 million pensioner households will receive an increased winter fuel payment. In addition to this, those eligible for pension credit will receive an extra £650. This government will always support the most vulnerable.
Jones.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this month, I contacted around 6,000 people in my constituency who may have been eligible for pension credit. Around 200 people attended local action days I organised with my local Citizens Advice Bureaus. And as at last week, Citizens Advice informs me that at least £200,000 has been accessed due to contacts on that day with take-up of pension credit and other benefits. So far, the Department's action, frankly, has been limited and half-hearted. The government really should put its money where its mouth is and pay pensioners what they're entitled to. With the information and the data that the government has at its disposal, could I ask the Minister what further action the government will take to increase take-up on pension credit?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I applaud the work that he's doing within his own constituency. This is an incredibly important matter. 7 out of 10 people who are entitled to pension credit claim it. We want to drive that up. The Right Honourable Member for Hexham has done a huge amount of work on this, and I intend to continue that in the department.
Manjeet Singh Desi.
Thank you very much. Mr Speaker, irresponsible Conservative policies have meant that pension funds needed 3 emergency bailouts to the tune of billions of pounds, whilst the spiralling prices of energy, food and other essential items have meant that millions will be facing a very difficult winter. Indeed, statistics from earlier this year, before the cost of living crisis worsened even further, showed that 20%, that is well over 2 million pensioners, already lived in poverty, a dramatic increase from a decade ago. So, Minister, why should pensioners trust this government to help them through this mess when it was the reckless behaviour of Conservative ministers that has worsened their plight?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would point the honourable gentleman to our record. Absolute pensioner poverty has gone down, real incomes have gone up. This government is on the side of pensioners.
Mr Speaker, I welcome my honourable friend to her place at the dispatch box, and I also welcome the work that this government is doing to support pensioners, particularly around winter fuel costs in what are very difficult times. But for my pensioners, Mr Speaker, in Aldridge Brownhills, many of them are very anxious about the continuous rising cost of living. So I'd like to ask my honourable friend, when can we have some clarity regarding the triple lock?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I completely understand my right honourable friend's question, but this is a matter for the autumn statement. I wouldn't want to preempt that.
All right, I'm absolutely baffled. Kevin sorry, we now have Shadow Minister Matt Robber.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I would like to welcome the new Minister to her place. Mr Speaker, the last few weeks have been difficult and, frankly, at times chaotic. The government has crashed the economy, and there's been a revolving door in Downing Street and indeed in other government departments. After all this confusion, will the Minister now take the opportunity to reassure the House that the government is truly committed to the triple lock, and will she also apologise to pensioners for the stress and uncertainty the government has caused by its repeated attempts to wriggle out of its manifesto commitment?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I do understand the uncertainty, but I think we do have to wait for the 17th. However, I would like to point out to the honourable gentleman that the average state pension is £185 a week, which is approximately double what it was in 2010 when we took over.
Kevin McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm currently conducting my statutory annual review of state pensions and benefit rates. The outcome of that review will be announced in due course.
Kenny McCaskill.
I thank the Minister for his answer. Trussell Trust is reporting that 40% of universal credit claimants are skipping meals due to budgetary constraints. Does he accept that with neither the full energy crisis costs impacting yet, and indeed winter still to arrive, that it would be perverse if bankers' bonuses are uncapped, and yet pension benefits are not to be able to increase, at least in line with inflation?
Well, I'm afraid the honourable gentleman, I do thank him for his question. He will be aware of the various answers that have been given from this dispatch box as to the support that the government is giving, particularly for those who are most vulnerable across winter, and in respect of food and food banks. I think that is very pertinent. But I'm afraid he will receive the same answer on this issue of when will the House come to know of the uprating that may be applied to pensions and indeed the pension triple lock and indeed to benefits more generally. And that is that it is a decision for me as Secretary of State, of course in conjunction with discussions with the Treasury, and those figures will be available at the time of the autumn statement on the 17th of November.
Dr Neil Hudson then.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I very much welcome the Prime Minister's commitment that compassion will be at the heart of government. It is so important that we support the most vulnerable in society. With that in mind, will my right honourable friend agree that we can show that compassion and support by uprating benefits in line with inflation?
I'm afraid I just need, unfortunately, Mr Speaker, to refer my honourable friend to my previous reply.
Chris Grayling.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question 16.
In April 2020, Mr Speaker, the local housing allowance rate in Epsom and Ewell increased to the 30th percentile of local market rents, and the government further boosted LHA rates by £1 billion.
Mr Grayling.
Mr Speaker, can I first of all congratulate the new ministerial team on their appointment. Mr Speaker, the challenge in a constituency like mine, even at a time when the government is spending a very substantial amount of money on housing support, is that an area like mine in the south-east, inside the M25, where housing costs are very high, the local housing allowance simply doesn't enable people to get into private rented accommodation. Can I ask my honourable friend if he and his colleagues will look again at the way local housing allowance is structured and the way it's allocated across the country to try and make sure it does work everywhere?
Well, my honourable friend is a doughty campaigner on this issue, and he will be aware, though, that this cannot be looked at in isolation. We have to look at the additional support that is there from the discretionary housing payments, which are available from the local authority, up to £1.5 billion across all local authorities. Also, there is the cost of living support package of £37 billion plus, and obviously the household support fund, again administered by local authorities.
Mr Speaker, question 17.
Mr Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions 17 and 25 together. Unemployment is at 3.5%, Mr Speaker. That is the lowest in nearly 50 years. We have recruited an extra 13,000 plus job coaches, and we're taking specific action to ensure that we are rolling out our new in-work progression offer.
Jane Bannon.
Much, Mr Speaker. Loughborough Job Centre is doing a great job in supporting new and fledgling business owners to help support them to become gainfully self-employed. What steps is the DWP taking across the country to help support small business owners and support growth and development of the self-employed across the UK?
The staff at Loughborough Job Centre, and my honourable friend is absolutely right. They are doing an outstanding job, and I know they recently held a very successful jobs fair. And on the issue of the self-employed nationwide, Universal Credit gives them a 12-month start-up period to grow their earnings up to a sustainable level, and we believe that is the way forward.
Lawrence Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In order to try to help fill the very many vacancies which exist in a number of industries, will the Minister have discussions with his fellow ministers in the Treasury to see if more changes to the tax system can be brought in to really make sure that work does pay?
Well, I completely agree with my honourable friend, who makes a very good point. It is absolutely the case that we are working on this. I would highlight in particular the taper rate, which was reduced from 63% down to 55%, but also the additional work that we're putting into job coaches, the sector-based work academy, and the increased work allowance, which makes sure that individuals get an extra £1,000.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. One of the things that is preventing people from getting back into work is that they're waiting for operations, thanks to the massive NHS backlog. One of the things that is making that even worse is that lots of doctors are retiring early because they're worried about the pension cap issue. So when will the government rectify this issue so that more doctors can stay in the profession, more people can get their operations quickly, and more people can get back into work?
Well, I appreciate that it is a genuine issue, and I know that the Treasury are specifically looking at the high earners' pension situation, and I'm sure the Treasury will get back to my honourable friend very shortly.
We now come to topicals. Luke Pollard.
Topical 2, please, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I am honoured to have been appointed as the Secretary of State at Work and Pensions, and I can inform the House that I have two early key missions. One is to focus on those who are economically inactive, as I have been suggesting already at the dispatch box. But the second is to pursue with vigour the Prime Minister's personal commitment to us being a compassionate, caring department, supporting the most vulnerable, which, at the end of the day, is a hallmark of a civilised society.
Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to welcome a fellow Devon MP to his position. Will he agree to meet with me and Bernardo's to discuss the concerns of care leavers from Devon that I recently hosted in Westminster, who, without a rent guarantor, can't afford a deposit on a rental property of their own? Will he consider a pilot to help these young people get a better start in life?
Well, can I thank my my honourable friend, I will call him an honourable friend, certainly a colleague from Devon, for his question. And I know of the excellent work that he has been carrying out with Bernardo's in this area, and I would be delighted to meet with him and Bernardo's and whoever else he feels appropriate to discuss those issues.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard earlier about those who are economically inactive, and figures show that in the West Midlands, including my Rugby and Bulkington constituency, over 50s have been less likely to return to the workplace after COVID than their younger counterparts. And businesses in all sectors tell me just how badly these workers are needed. So what initiatives is the department working on to get more older people back into work? And I wonder if the Minister would join me in coming along to an over 50s fair that we're holding in Rugby in the new year.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd be delighted to go to Rugby. Of course I would. I welcome the fact that my honourable friend is holding an over 50s fair, and he will be aware that there is the 50-plus choices and also the midlife MOT that we're rolling out at Department of Work and Pensions to ensure that these matters are being addressed.
Secretary of State Jonathan Ashworth.
Speaker, can I welcome the new Secretary of State to his post, and indeed welcome the new ministers and welcome back returning ministers. Now, I listened carefully to the Secretary of State saying that he wants a compassionate approach. So can I press him further on the point that numerous members have put to him? He will know that not sticking to the triple lock for pensioners will mean a real terms cut in the pension of hundreds of pounds. He will know that not inflation-proofing universal credit will mean an average household will lose £450. A household with a disabled person in it will lose over £550. So why does he no longer agree with himself from the 4th of October when he said this is one of those areas where the government is going to have to think again?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can reassure the House that I always agree with myself. That is right. That's not the same thing as saying that I'm always right, incidentally, but I always at least am consistent in that respect. We will have to wait, the right honourable gentleman, but sorry, I should have said that it is a pleasure to be opposite him, and I look forward to many months of constructive engagement with him. But I think it's very important that we don't overlook the huge amount that the government is doing to target assistance at the most vulnerable. So in the cost of living support package alone, £650 for 8 million households who are the most vulnerable, £300 for pensions on pensions credit, £150 for those who have disabilities. And I think that's very important.
But the Prime Minister tells us we don't need a general election because the 2019 manifesto gives him and the Conservative Party a mandate. So given that manifesto committed to the triple lock, why can he not give the reassurance to pensioners that they deserve? And can I ask him a second point? Can he give a categorical assurance that in the autumn statement he will rule out means testing, personal independence payments, carers allowance, attendance allowance and disability living allowance for children?
Well, Mr. Speaker, on a whole host of areas there, the right honourable gentleman is inviting me to break with what has been a very, very long-standing and quite correct convention that when it comes to a major fiscal event, ministers simply do not provide a running commentary as to what may or may not be in that fiscal event. But he has my personal assurance that when and as it is appropriate to pass him information of that kind, then he will be the first to know.
Lee Anderson.
Speaker, Alan, I met a young lady last week in Parliament called Florence. Florence has Down syndrome, and she tells me that she's got 5 paid jobs and 3 voluntary jobs because she's trying to get into the workplace and is coming across lots and lots of barriers. So does the Minister agree with me that we should do more to help people like Florence get in the workplace with special education needs, and what better place to start than right here in Parliament?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I strongly agree with him. And of course, programmes like the Access to Work scheme have supported the government in its commitment to see 1 million more disabled people in work in the decade to 2027 being met 5 years early, and we want to create more of those opportunities, in which spirit I want to commend Florence for her determination, and as a government we're determined to help her to succeed.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since I came to this place in 2019, I have worked with and fought the corner of all the women in Newport West who face discrimination due to their gender and age. And these WASPy women have shown incredible perseverance and tenacity over the years. So can the Minister set out steps being taken to address this injustice? And if she can't meet these women because of the ongoing investigation, then will she meet with me to discuss this important issue at the earliest opportunity?
Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to meet with the Honourable Lady, but I would also point out that the state pension system corrects some of the historic inequalities of the previous system, producing considerably higher outcomes for women.
On to Ben Spencer.
Mr. Speaker, I recently met with the Runnymede and Spelthorne Citizens Advice Bureau and was incredibly impressed by Becky and her superb team of staff and volunteers and the crucial support they give to residents in Runnymede and Weybridge, working alongside the Department for Work and Pensions. Would my right honourable friend join me in thanking Becky and her fantastic team for the work that they do?
Yeah. So I echo and support what my honourable friend has said, and he is right to laud what Becky and her team is doing. He will be aware that over the last few years, Citizens Advice, both in England and also in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, have done fantastic work, playing a hugely valuable role, rolling out Help to Claim scheme across the United Kingdom.
Cole Turner.
Mr. Speaker, I would also congratulate the Secretary of State on his appointment and indeed welcome his team of ministers onto the Treasury bench. The Secretary of State will understand, I think, that people, lots of people, many people in East Hull work incredibly hard, incredibly long hours, but despite all of their efforts, they do still rely on benefits. So would he agree with me that it would be incredibly mean if the Chancellor of the Exchequer was now to row back on the commitment of uprating benefits in line with inflation?
Well, the honourable gentleman has been in the chamber long enough during these questions to know that I can't comment on the uprating or otherwise of benefits. However, he should take into account the numerous positive tax changes that have been over the years for those hard-working constituents that he refers to, not least the very significant increase in the personal allowance since 2010, and of course the change to the taper under universal credit, which makes a difference to many millions of people up and down the land.
Robinson.
My constituent suffered months of worry and stress as his employer failed to pay any pension contribution into his workplace scheme. Raising it with his boss made him fear for his job, and the regulator gives no feedback on investigations. So would my right honourable friend consider whether the current £400 statutory penalty notice and regulatory powers are sufficient to ensure employers fulfil their pension contributions duties?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Independent Pensions Regulator has robust powers in place to investigate compliance and issue fines, and I urge my right honourable friend's constituent to report their concerns in confidence to them, but I am happy to meet with her to discuss this further.
Dan Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Harry, my 11-year-old constituent, has cerebral palsy. He was previously awarded the higher rate mobility component of DLA until it was downgraded. It took nearly 2 months for mandatory reconsideration to uphold the decision, which his family are now appealing. There's currently no tribunal date, meaning that the family face a prolonged period of uncertainty and anxiety. Will the Minister look at the detail of Harry's case with a view to expediting a date for a tribunal as soon as possible?
Can I just thank the honourable gentleman for the constructive way in which he has approached this issue. I would, of course, be very happy to be in contact with him if he could share the details with me about this specific case. What I can just say, hopefully to give some reassurance, is in relation to mandatory reconsiderations, we are seeing 400 extra people dedicated to this work, and waiting times are dropping, and I think that we need to sustain that performance as well as get right first time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that this fine ministerial team will be pleased to know that my recent job fair perfectly complements the Employment and Skills Pathfinder programme. So will a minister come to Willenhall Job Centre to meet their excellent policy and partnership staff to discuss what more we can do together to help people progress in employment?
Well, I am fantastically pleased to hear about the jobs fair that my honourable friend has had, and he is a doughty champion for Walsall, and either myself or much more illustrious Secretary of State would be delighted to come to Walsall and see the great work that is being done there.
Amy Callaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Saturday was World Stroke Day. I simply ask if this government will uprate benefits in line with inflation, which will particularly help the growing population living with a disability. I know I won't get an answer to this in our commitment today, but I ask that you consider it for the autumn statement. Thank you.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for making that argument. I think, as and colleagues have said consistently now at the dispatch box, we're not going to provide a running commentary ahead of that autumn statement on the 17th of November, where the Chancellor will set out the situation in the normal way.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few weeks ago at Paul's, I met with my constituent Nigel Seaman, who's a veteran, to discuss combat to coffee and the work that he does to get veterans who may be homeless, who may be struggling with transition to civilian life, into work and employment. Will the Minister meet with me and Nigel to discuss what more can be done to support excellent veterans charities such as Combat to Coffee to help veterans into work? Yeah.
Well, I'm very pleased I'm wearing my Help for Heroes band today. I'm delighted to hear about the work of that charity and the work that we do with our champions in job centres in terms of getting people to work who have been service leaders. We have work coaches dedicated to that. I'll be happy to meet my honourable friend to find out more about that charity and tell them more about what we do in job centres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would appear the government plans to clear up this economic disaster that was created by them is to implement austerity 2.0. Now, nearly 1.5 million people, including many of my constituents, have been pushed into poverty as a result of their policies, cuts to the social security net, the benefit cap and support for disabled people, as well as the cruel and inhumane conditionality and sanctions regime. So I want to ask the new Secretary of State, what discussions is he having with the Chancellor to ensure that it won't be those from the low-income households that will go through any further cuts to social security to help clear up this mess created by his government?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her point, and may I point out that the benefit cap is important in terms of restoring the fairness between those on working age benefits and taxpayers in employment. And importantly, that and changes to the taper rate means that moving people into work wherever possible is the best way out of poverty.
Gibson.
Last year, there were an estimated 1 million people in receipt of carers allowance who are of working age. After 3.5 years of caring for his father full-time, a constituent of mine whose father has recently passed away is now not able to access job seekers' allowance. He's not considered to have been employed. What is my right honourable friend doing to rectify this situation?
If my honourable friend writes to me with the specific details, I will ensure that the ministerial team and the civil servants involved look into it urgently.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the new Secretary of State, who I welcome to his place, still agree with his statement that actually cutting maternity rights will be good for business?
Well, given that I never made that statement, then I don't agree. I don't agree with it. No.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Deputy Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Yeah. Sorry. I might get chosen next time, will I? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government has done a lot to support people with their cost of living challenges, but elderly residents in my constituency are really troubled by reports in the newspapers suggesting that we may not meet our manifesto commitment of keeping pensions up with the triple lock. Pensioners face a triple whammy of dwindling savings value to low interest rates, rising costs due to inflation, and the inability due to their elderly age to go out and earn any more. So can my right honourable friend please confirm that we will increase pensions in line with inflation?
Well, I do admire my honourable friend's persistence on this matter, but I'm afraid I have to give her the same answer as I have on numerous occasions during this question session, that we will have to wait until at least the 17th of November to have an answer. But I do understand the particular pressure that pensioners are under, unable to often change their economic circumstances as others are within the labour force, but we will have to wait.
A number of my constituents that work for the DWP have raised concerns that despite being promised enhanced holiday pay due to working overtime consistently, they're not being paid enhanced holiday pay. Upon inquiry, the DWP have told me that current legislation provides no definition of regularity. Could the Minister please address this issue?
I thank the honourable gentleman for raising that matter. I'd be happy if he wrote to me with details to look into that.
Nick Fletcher.
Speaker, I've written twice to the Department regarding the relocation of back office staff from Crossgate House in Doncaster city centre to Sheffield. I've only received negative replies. This is not what the staff want, and with many Doncaster council offices empty with this new model of hybrid working, Doncaster is losing much needed footfall. Can the Minister meet with me to see if this decision can be reversed?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising that issue. It's something that I was looking at previously. I'm aware of his concerns. I'm happy to meet with him and get an update on the situation.
Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Along with many other members in the House today, I've a number of emails from concerned pensioners, including one constituent who says, if the triple lock isn't rated, myself and many others will have to pare our spending even more. Occasional meetups with friends will be the next to go, and then more and more people will become isolated and depressed. So would the Secretary of State agree with me that maintaining the triple lock will help the health and well-being of our pensioners as we go through into the winter?
There's a massive support package.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I completely understand the concerns, but that's why we've put a package of support in place now, worth over £850 for everyone receiving state pension and £1,500 for those in receipt of pension credit.
Good, Davis.
Mr. Speaker, last week we celebrated the 10-year anniversary of automatic pension enrolment. As this is genuinely an amazing cross-party policy achievement that has transformed the savings culture across our country. As we look back on that success, will the ministers now consider expanding it to 18 to 22-year-olds?
Minister.
Well, in my former life, I was very much looking at that specific policy, and I'm quite sure that the government will be addressing it very shortly.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I attended York Cost of Living Summit and I heard the impact that food poverty, heating poverty and housing poverty is having on my constituents. One issue is the rate at which the benefits cap is set. By 2027 it won't be reviewed for 11 years. So can the Secretary of State make representation to the Chancellor to ensure that cap is reviewed for the 17th of November?
Mr. Speaker, I am in the process of reviewing just that matter and many of the others that we've discussed, and so therefore we will have to wait, but that is one of the matters that is under review.
Final question, Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We look forward to the Secretary of State appearing before the Select Committee, so can he give us an assurance before he does that the Department will publish its systematic evidence-based review on food bank use, which the Department promised to publish and place the Commons Library 2 years ago, so we can debate the policy issues required to eliminate hunger across these islands?
Well, the honourable gentleman here, and I look forward to appearing before him and his fellow members of the committee, raises a very specific point and issue which I will look into and I will come back to.
That completes the questions. From bench, one is clear.